In the midst of political pomp, the president promised that al-Qaeda was on the run.
Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat, and Osama bin Laden is dead.
Less than a week later, 4 Americans lay dead in Benghazi. An attack all the more shocking because it came on 9/11. The administration immediately blamed a YouTube video for the murders.
These protests were in reaction to a video. But we have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack.
That assertion was soon challenged by those in a position to know, as a former general who monitored the attack in real time reiterated in testimony just this week.
This was a hostile action. This was no demonstration gone terribly awry.
The president long ago dismissed the Benghazi controversy as a partisan political sideshow.
The whole thing defies logic.
But now, the court-ordered release of White House emails and the news that there will likely be a select House committee to investigate what happened in Benghazi suggest a different story.
It is disturbing and perhaps criminal.
Good evening. I'm Brett Baer from our Washington, D.C. newsroom. Tonight, Fox News reporting, Benghazi. Has a White House cover-up finally been revealed? We start with breaking news, a stunning new development. On Capitol Hill, Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen with the very latest. James.
Brett, good evening. House Speaker John Boehner announced his chamber will soon vote to create a special select House committee to investigate the Benghazi attacks. The Ohio Republican had long resisted calls for a Watergate-style committee, but he cited the recent disclosure of emails showing that White House Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes played a critical early role in shaping a false narrative of the attacks. These revelations compel the House to take every possible action to ensure the American people have the truth, Boehner said, adding, "I intend for this select committee to have robust authority, and I will expect it to work quickly to get answers." The panel will be bipartisan, but like the House itself, controlled by the GOP. Brett.
James, I guess this means the mainstream media will have to cover this story a bit more now.
That would stand to reason. We're talking about the formation of a dedicated congressional committee with subpoena power that will likely be live streaming testimony from key witnesses.
Thank you, James. That was the bombshell on the Hill, just down Pennsylvania Avenue. The other bombshell, an email emanating from the White House. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge.
Nearly 20 months after the attack in Benghazi, the administration's explanations about who knew what and when are beginning to unravel in a very public way. An email sent 3 days after the attack leads directly to the White House and suggests a senior advisor to President Obama played a central role preparing former UN Ambassador Susan Rice for the Sunday talk shows, where she blamed an anti-Muslim internet video for the deaths of 4 Americans.
If this is not a smoking gun, proving beyond any doubt that the story told by the administration about Benghazi was politically motivated and fabricated, nothing will ever prove that.
Among more than 100 pages of documents obtained by Judicial Watch as part of a federal lawsuit is an email from Ben Rhodes, an assistant to the president and deputy national security advisor for strategic communications. With the subject line, "Prep Call with Susan," Rhodes writes to a dozen members of the administration's inner circle, including key players on the White House communications team, such as spokesman Jay Carney, that one of the goals is, quote, to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy.
The goal of the White House was to do one thing primarily, which was to make the president look good, blame it on the video, and not on the president's policies.
The Rhodes email is significant because it was not part of the 100 pages of emails released last May by the administration, and it conflicted with the available intelligence, a point reinforced in new congressional testimony.
Was it a video?
No, sir.
Was it a video that sparked a protest?
No, sir.
When pushed to explain the Rhodes email, the White House claimed it was not about the murder of 4 Americans.
It was explicitly not about Benghazi. It was about the overall situation in the region.
But the Rhodes email talks about justice for those who harmed Americans, and the only Americans killed on September 11th were in Benghazi. While the administration has consistently blamed the CIA talking points for the flawed video explanation, the agency's former deputy director recently testified he was surprised when Rice made the connection.
When she talked about the video, my reaction was that's not something that the analysts have attributed this attack to.
The White House press corps skepticism came to a head in this exchange with ABC News.
Why did it take a court case for you to release this?
John, I can say it again and again, and I know you can keep asking again and again. This document was not about Benghazi.
It was your prep for the Sunday shows.
It wasn't her only prep, John. She relied on, for her answers on Benghazi, on the document prepared by the CIA, as did members of Congress.
The frustration on Capitol Hill has been building for more than a year and a half. Where did the video explanation really come from, given U.S. personnel on the ground in Libya never reported a protest or a video?
This was a hostile action. This was no demonstration gone terribly awry.
In new congressional testimony, a retired brigadier general who was monitoring events that night said an al-Qaeda-linked group was immediately identified.
It was, we felt it was Ansar al-Sharia.
What has largely been overlooked is that on the night of the attack, Mrs. Clinton spoke with the president. While the exact timing is unknown, at 10:07 p.m., Clinton sent out a press release before the attack was over, directly linking the Benghazi violence to the video. Brett Baier asked former National Security Council spokesman Tommy Vietor where that information came from.
September 11th, who tells Hillary Clinton at 10 p.m. to put out this statement that says some have sought to justify this vicious behavior? The announcement has already happened about the Benghazi attack as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. Now, at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, this is still going on, this attack. So where does that come from?
I don't know.
Did you also change attacks to demonstrations in the talking points?
Maybe. I don't really remember.
You don't remember?
Dude, this was like 2 years ago. We're still talking about the most mundane
it is the thing
process
that everybody is talking about.
We're talking about the process of editing talking points. That's what bureaucrats do all day long.
Vietor also conceded that the president was not in the Situation Room on the night of the attack.
Then when Hillary Clinton talks to him by phone at 10 p.m., he's where?
I don't know. I don't have a tracking device on him in the residence.
But you were in the Situation Room and he wasn't there.
House. Yes, I was in the White House.
And the president was not in the Situation Room?
Not in the room I was in.
Administration critics say the Ben Rhodes email has laid responsibility for the false narrative about the video directly at the White House and forced the issue. There will now be a select committee formed to investigate the Benghazi scandal.
Let's bring in our panel to discuss this week's revelations. Syndicated columnist George Will, Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, a lot happened this week.
A lot happened. The case has been reopened. And the reason is this memo that came from the White House. And it was a prep memo from a member of the National Security Staff to Susan Rice for the famous talking points for her explanations on television that were 100% false. And the question had always been, had this come from the lower downs? Had this come from CIA? And what's important here is that it says, and he's telling her what the goal of her appearance is to be, to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. The only explanation of the White House, and this is what Carney had been pushing for a week, is that this had nothing to do with Benghazi. This had to do with all the other demonstrations. That is a preposterous proposition. The reason Susan Rice was on the show, the reason she got the prepping, the reason she had to be told our goals was because of the Benghazi deaths. It was not because anybody would have cared about the Cairo demonstrations. And when he says the protest, is the implication of the White House that what he was talking about is every protest around the world, Cairo, Sri Lanka, but not the Benghazi one? Of course he was including the Benghazi one. There wasn't a protest, there wasn't a demonstration, the video was irrelevant. This was a way to tell her, to tell the nation a story about a video that would, in essence, politically exonerate the president 6 weeks before an election.
This stirred this all up again, Mara.
It stirred it all up again. I think that it did give the story a new set of legs. And I think that even if nothing else comes out between now and 2016, this will be an issue in the 2016 race if Hillary Clinton runs.
It's interesting. Hillary Clinton, Steve, puts out, as Secretary of State at shortly after 10 p.m., the first statement about Benghazi. We've learned about Benghazi. Now she puts out a statement. We're focused on this email now, but that was the first time the video really came up tied to Benghazi.
It was, and she later brought it up at the arrival ceremony when the caskets came back from Libya. Look, I think there are still real questions about what Hillary Clinton's involvement was and who actually conceived this video idea, this video narrative the White House pushed so hard. But I think what the Ben Rhodes email did this week, the revelation of the Ben Rhodes email did, was it told us that there were in effect two different sets of talking points. One was created, at least originated, with the intelligence community, with heavy input from Obama administration officials, and was intended for delivery to Capitol Hill. The second, which is distinct and which was revealed in these Judicial Watch documents this week, part of it was the Ben Rhodes email, then there were other talking points, were created by the White House for Susan Rice for her appearances on the Sunday shows. And the difference between the two is the former, the first set, made virtually no mention of video. I mean, the talking points that came from the intelligence community didn't mention the video at all, and the 100 pages of emails that were released in May of 2013 mentioned the video only twice in passing. The second set of talking points, the video was suddenly the central part of the story.
You did a lot of the early reporting there. Do you feel vindicated now?
Well, I think we certainly have more answers to questions that we were asking back then, but we have more questions that we need answers to.
George.
Well, the American people are not astonished that certitudes turn out to be not certainties. We went to war in Iraq for 10 years, and it began over weapons of mass destruction and yellow cake uranium and all kinds of things that turned out to be intelligence failures. I think the American people understand that Lord knows they don't expect perfection from their government. They do not, however, want to be actively misled, and that's why it is the length, the durability of the narrative about the videos that will matter. At what point did it just become too implausible for words to keep saying those words? And I think that's the next question is, what did they know and when did they not know it?
We'll have more from the panel in just a second, including why did it take so long to get this email to come out from the White House, and also what the former National Security Council spokesman has to say now about all this. More on the latest revelations after the break. And we're back with the panel. Earlier this week, I had an interview with the former NSC spokesman Tommy Vitor. Charles, I asked him whether he changed in the CIA talking points from attacks to demonstrations, and he said he didn't remember, even though this is kind of a central point. And then he said, dude, it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, the dude works hard in changing stuff that officials are supposed to say, and he says, you know, I do a lot of this, that's what a bureaucrat does. How can I remember? Well, you would remember if somebody asked you, there were documents, there's been an argument about this for 2 years, and he and his cohorts are accusing Republicans who are asking legitimate questions of being entirely politically motivated. So he should be interested, he should go back, and he should answer. And the fact that he says he doesn't remember, it's a long time ago for an issue of this importance, is rather suspicious. But I think what's most interesting is they don't have a resort. They've been trying to say the lie told by Susan Rice. Now, she might have been unwitting or deliberate. I'll give her a pass on that. But what she said was not true. And that they've been saying it all came from the CIA. We now know that the CIA had to alter the talking points under heavy pressure from the White House and from the State Department. But also, this is the smoking gun, this is the memo that exposes the direct White House intervention, the prep call. She was prepped, there was a call, there was explanation. And the emphasis entirely is on a protest that did not happen in Benghazi, on a demonstration that didn't happen in Benghazi, that became this attack. And the fact that they pushed this, and they had Rice say it, and when we had Gregory Hicks, who was number 2 in Libya, say under testimony that his jaw dropped when he heard this. That was the first electric moment. This is the second electric moment.
Not only Gregory Hicks, Steve, but Mike Morrell, the former deputy director of the CIA, said when he saw Susan Rice that he understood the protest part, but they had nothing to do with the video.
Right, they're making a major distinction between the set of talking points that the intelligence community provided and which, as Charles notes, heavily edited after input from the State Department, from the White House. But that set of talking points didn't mention the video, wasn't about the video. And then Susan Rice's story was all about the video, in concert with the emails that we've now seen from Ben Rhodes and the other arguments that we've heard, or that we saw in the White House issued talking points. I think the most interesting thing when you look at the new batch of documents is this reclassification or classification of documents that were previously unclassified. I mean, the timeline is fascinating. June of 2013, Judicial Watch makes a FOIA request for these documents. August of 2013, the House Oversight Committee subpoenas the documents. In February of 2014, somebody, somewhere, classifies previously unclassified emails. And then in April of 2014, as part of this release, we get redacted versions of those emails that have been retroactively classified. I think I would expect that you'll have House committees and maybe others looking into exactly why those documents were classified after the fact.
George, Tommy Vitor said to me that the president was not in the Situation Room that night. And when asked where was he said the White House. I guess the question is, people wanted to know where the commander-in-chief was that night in this breaking situation. At that point, they don't know where the ambassador is. We don't find out he's dead until much later. And the battle's still going on. And we had never, up until that interview, heard anybody from the White House say that he was not in the Situation Room.
That's one question, is the direct involvement of the president acting on information as it was coming in. A second question is, it seems to me, did Hillary Clinton, who at 10 o'clock releases this statement about a video, did she talk that night with Leon Panetta? And if so, what did Leon Panetta say? Because he sits under a torrent of information coming in from around the world to the U.S. military and the Pentagon. So again, it's a question of what did they know? It's not new for government to massage the truth. It's not new for them to go as far as they can possibly go with a particular comforting theory, such as the video. What is new, and this would be the real smoking gun, would be at some point for enough evidence to accumulate that they were saying this when they had to know that it was no longer true.
We have heard testimony multiple times that the military, the intelligence community, and others on the ground in Benghazi were putting up through their chains, Mara, that this was definitively a terrorist attack. The CIA station chief said this was not an escalation of a protest, to try to emphasize to people, don't go with the protest.
You know, George raised the question about durability. You know, how long did it take? Within a week, September 11th is the attack. By September 18th, he's on the David Letterman show saying terrorists exploited this video, it was part of it, they used it as an excuse. Then September 19th, National Counterterrorism Center head says this was definitely a terrorist attack. So things started to change within about a week. So the question is, before that happened, was this a purposeful, effort to lie about it? And did they know? The question you asked, we don't have the answer to that yet. And the other thing that's amazing...
The problem is that we're going to see a timeline piece in just a minute, but the president then references the video in the United Nations speech on September 25th.
Yes, he almost went back to his previous...
And he talks about it again in a couple of interviews. So that's really the tough part, is you have all these people on the ground saying this was an organized military strike on a facility, and yet 14 days later, it's not getting through, or purposely.
And you would expect, if the White House, in fact, if none of this information actually made it to the White House, I mean, we have the State Department email from Beth Jones talking about Ansar al-Sharia. We have a CIA memo on September 12th
point to that
talking
one.
about
Beth Jones from the State Department says the Libyans thought that this was former Gaddafi people, and the State Department says no. It's Ansar al-Sharia tied to al-Qaeda extremists, and we know that they were behind it.
That comes from somewhere. Where did she get that information? One assumes from the CIA station chief, who had also written a memo, Greg Hicks. There had been a video teleconference. There's a new DIA document that hasn't been much discussed that was published just before Ben Rhodes sent his email on September 14th laying out who was to blame. The White House had to have this information.
The tough part about this story is getting it all in context, trying to go back to that time and make sure you understand it all. Sometimes that takes time. When we return, we'll take you back to those horrific events in Benghazi and the surprising political fallout that followed. Now we take you back to September 11th, 2012, and just what was said by whom in the wake of the attacks that killed 4 Americans, including the U.S. Ambassador, Chris Stevens.
Today, without a single American casualty, Muammar Gaddafi is gone and the people of Libya are free.
Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat and Osama bin Laden is dead.
September 6th, 2012. Soon-to-be Secretary of State John Kerry and President Obama speak at the 2012 Democratic National Convention. But less than a week after these boasts, on the anniversary of 9/11, disaster struck in Libya. At 5 p.m. Eastern Time comes the first wire reports of a raid on the U.S. mission in Benghazi. The attacks would last some 7 hours, and before it was done, they'd claim the lives of 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. 8 p.m., Deputy Chief of Station Gregory Hicks in Tripoli talks by telephone to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He tells her that the American facility in Benghazi is under attack. That night, he told another State Department official that those attacks were conducted by the local al-Qaeda franchise, Ansar al-Sharia, which might have captured the U.S. ambassador. 10 p.m. After talking with Hicks, Clinton updates President Obama.
I spoke with President Obama later in the evening to bring him up to date, to hear his perspective.
Shortly afterwards, Clinton puts out a statement on the Benghazi attack, which includes the following, quote, "Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. The United States deplores any intentional effort to denigrate the religious beliefs of others." September 12th, the Rose Garden. While the president does refer in a general way to acts of terror, he seems to be embracing the belief that the 4 Americans were killed in a spontaneous riot over an anti-Muslim video.
Since our founding, the United States has been a nation that respects all faiths. We reject all efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others.
That afternoon, the president leaves for a campaign trip and fundraiser in Las Vegas. The death of an American ambassador as the Arab Spring threatens to turn into an autumn of discontent, all right in the middle of a presidential campaign. September 13th, Secretary of State Clinton again suggests the attack was a spontaneous demonstration.
There is no justification, none at all, for responding to this video with violence.
White House Press Secretary Jay Carney says so flat out the next day.
These protests were in reaction to a video. We have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack.
And later that day, when the President and Secretary of State greet the deceased at Joint Base Andrews, Clinton again talks about the video.
We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with.
Charles Woods, the father of one of the dead, says Clinton turned to him and made a promise.
She mentioned that thing about we're going to have that person arrested and prosecuted that did the video.
Meanwhile, White House advisor Ben Rhodes composes an email. The subject? Prep call with Susan. It's sent to, among others, senior political advisors David Plouffe and Dan Pfeiffer, and Press Secretary Jay Carney. Secretary of State Clinton had decided not to appear on the Sunday talk shows, and this memo is apparently the White House strategy for her replacement, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice. One stated goal in the emails is to, quote, underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. Another, quote, to reinforce the president and administration's strength and steadiness in dealing with difficult challenges. To worldwide media attention, California authorities haul Nakula Basili Nakula, the man who produced the now infamous YouTube video, in for questioning.
Do you have any regrets?
September 16th, Susan Rice goes on 5 Sunday talk shows, repeating the same story each time.
What happened initially was that it was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo as a consequence of the video.
On the same day, the president of Libya's General National Congress appears on Face the Nation and says the Benghazi attacks were anything but spontaneous.
It was planned, definitely it was planned by foreigners.
September 17th.
An intelligence source on the ground in Libya tells Fox there was no protest and the attacks were not spontaneous, the intelligence source said, adding the Libyan attack was planned and had nothing to do with the movie.
September 18th, the president appears on the David Letterman show, and his story is starting to shift. President Obama says the video did spark Muslim outrage, which terrorists then exploited to attack and kill Ambassador Stevens.
You had a video that was released by somebody who lives here, sort of a shadowy character. This caused great offense in much of the Muslim world, but what also happened was extremists and terrorists used this as an excuse to attack a variety of our embassies, including the consulate in Libya.
September 19th, Capitol Hill. The head of the National Counterterrorism Center testifies before Congress and plainly states what many now suspect.
I would say yes. They were killed in the course of a terrorist attack on our embassy.
September 20th.
It is, I think, self-evident that what happened in Benghazi was a terrorist attack.
September 21st.
What happened in Benghazi was a terrorist attack.
September 27th. Nakula Basili Nakula is arrested for probation violations. The court determines he's a danger to society and a flight risk. He's held incommunicado. October 16th. Benghazi comes up in the second presidential debate.
It took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
November 6th, President Obama is re-elected. November 7th, Nakula Basili Nakula appears in court and is sentenced to a year in federal prison. Much has been said about what the military could or should have done during the attacks. We examine that when we return. Now, national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin explores what military options existed during the Benghazi attacks and the lasting impact that battle has had on our armed forces.
The attack on the diplomatic compound and CIA annex in Benghazi lasted more than 7 hours, and yet no outside U.S. military assets, fighter jets, or rapid reaction special operations teams made it into Libya in time to help rescue those who were left behind. This American special operator, a member of a Tier 1 unit trained to respond to this kind of crisis, speaks for the frustration felt across the special operations community that night. Since he is still engaged in classified missions, he asked that we shield his identity.
It's horrible. When you're on the ground, you depend on each other. We're going to get through this situation, but when you look up and then nothing outside of the stratosphere is coming to help you or rescue you, That's a bad feeling. Huge breakdown between state and military. The State Department and the Defense Department need to get on the same sheet of music.
But hours of testimony to the Armed Services and Oversight Committees by commanders who were at the Pentagon during the attack, AFRICOM General Carter Ham and former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta paint a different picture.
There was not enough time, given the speed of the attack, for armed military assets to respond. The Department of Defense and the rest of the United States government spared no effort to do everything we could to try to save American lives.
That statement differed from what Panetta said on October 25th at a Pentagon press briefing, a pronouncement that angered many in the special operations community, including some on the ground that night.
We were prepared to respond to any contingency and certainly had forces in place to do that. But basic principle is that you don't deploy forces into harm's way without knowing what's going on, without having some real-time information about what's taking place.
16 months later, after multiple hearings with military commanders, Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee say the lesson of Benghazi is of a military that actually couldn't respond because of, quote, a severely degraded location and readiness posture of U.S. forces.
They did what they could with what they had. The bottom line here is they didn't have what they needed to respond.
Republicans also concluded that, quote, military commanders did not take all possible steps to prepare for a more extended operation. According to the Armed Services Committee report, no attack aircraft were placed on high alert on September 11th. Fighter jets were unarmed and air refuelers were 10 hours away in Great Britain. House Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz blames it all on a leadership vacuum that night.
I think you're going to find that a lot of levers that the president had at his disposal were not pulled. Why did it take almost 4.5 hours to start the clock to prepare to deploy? It is the American way that when we have a man down, you send people in. We had people that were being killed. We had an ambassador who was missing. We didn't know when that attack was going to end. And the American military did not respond.
Chaffetz, who serves on the House Oversight Committee, put those questions and more to now retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Lovell, the Deputy Intelligence Chief for AFRICOM that night. Lovell was in the U.S. Military Operations Center in Stuttgart monitoring the attack in Benghazi in real time.
There was desperation there to be able to...
It was what?
Desperation there to gain situational awareness and to be able to do something to save people's lives.
But did they actually do it? We had dead people. We had wounded people. And our military didn't try to engage in that fight. Would you disagree with that?
4 individuals died. Sir, we obviously did not respond in time to get there.
Could we have?
We may have been able to, but we'll never know.
In his testimony, Lovell echoes a contention made by Republicans that part of why our mission in Benghazi was so vulnerable was because of administration policy, a premature push to normalize relations with the Libyans.
Basically, there was a lot of looking to the State Department for what it was that they wanted.
That push for normalization may have spread beyond the borders with Libya, leading to a military force woefully unready to deal with a terrorist attack that would turn into a pitched battle for survival. In his testimony, General Lovell sounded a theme often heard from military personnel when reflecting on Benghazi, a view perhaps more from the heart than from a clear-eyed operational assessment.
There are accounts of time, space, and capability, discussions of the question, could we have gotten there in time to make a difference? The point is we should have tried.
When we come back, the panel and I will discuss what we now know about Benghazi, also its possible impact on November's midterm elections, and the 2016 presidential campaign. Welcome back. It's been quite a week. So where does this go next? Let's bring back our panel. Syndicated columnist George Will, Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Mara Eliason, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. George, you heard Brigadier General Lovell testify up on the Hill. Your thoughts on that testimony and where that may take this whole thing?
Well, it was very affecting testimony, obviously painfully sincere, but it's going to take him and the military into an intramural argument, because he was saying, in effect, that the military did not do all that it could have done. And indeed, this goes to the basic military ethic that you don't leave people on the battlefield. And he essentially said they did. And that's, he had to know the dynamite he was handing out.
He also said, Steve, that the State Department was essentially in control and that they didn't try to go after them. They didn't know how long this attack was going to go, but they didn't try. Now, the ARB, the Accountability Review Board, the report by Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering, said that the military was not prepared, in position to be able to respond in time. But your thoughts on Lovell and how that affects this?
Well, the ARB didn't talk to General Lovell. The ARB didn't talk to many of the people who were involved in this decision-making process, including Hillary Clinton and others. So I don't see the ARB as anything near definitive on these matters. I think what we heard from General Lovell, as George says, was terribly affecting. He was a voluntary witness. This was somebody who wanted to come and sort of unburden himself because he was there on the ground. He was the Deputy Intelligence Director. His job was to have knowledge. He dismissed right away the claims that this was about a video or that this had originated in some protest. That evening, he dismissed those claims. And I think the most troubling thing he said was when he was asked about whether it would have made a difference if the United States military had rushed to the aid of the people who were under attack in Benghazi. And after a long pause, he said, "We don't know." That's a terrible thing for a senior military officer, somebody who's been in for 33 years, to have to say about his country.
Maura.
Yes, although he's also pressed to say, were there some resources that weren't used? Is that what you're saying? And he said no. I think that this part of the story, the fact that there wasn't enough protection at the embassy, there might not have been the proper response after it started, and the reasons for that, that's something that there shouldn't be a partisan fight over. The talking points is something different because it's all involved with re-election politics.
And possibly the politics of November of that year.
Right, but this is something different. I mean, when you have an American ambassador killed in a terrorist attack, I mean, that is really something. That can't happen. And, of course, the administration's argument is that the ARB's recommendations have been implemented and this should not happen again.
Charles.
But look, on the question, the searing question of could they have been saved, it isn't an answer to say, as some have concluded, and they could be right, that in retrospect they couldn't have been, given where our forces were positioned. But there was no way to know during the attack. Nobody would, there was no way to know it would be an 8 or 9 hour engagement and not an 18-hour engagement. So it raises the question, why was there given the fact that the length of the engagement was not known, what was done was enough done, and then that brings you to the highest levels, the Secretary of State and then the President. And that brings the question, where were they during what was essentially the 3 a.m. phone call, which ironically was her attack on him as candidates? Well, the call came in, she was supposed to answer it, he was, and what was done?
Let's talk about candidates, political implication. Obviously, the big part of this story is 4 people died, including the U.S. ambassador, and people want answers. The fallout and how it impacts politics. Maura.
I think this cycle, very little. I don't think this is going to enter into any of these Senate races and the 10 or so battlegrounds. 2016, if Hillary Clinton runs, I think this is an issue.
Certainly, if she runs, it's an issue. But also, we're going to have a long argument, I hope, that will try and change the categories. We're talking now about, was it a protest? Was it terrorism, and how long it took the president to say terrorism? I think it was neither. Obviously, it wasn't a protest. Terrorism is random violence. This was a military operation, probably an assassination. They wanted to kill an ambassador, which they did. And that's why, once we begin to sort out the categories, then we're going to have something to talk to Hillary Clinton about.
And this is bigger in the sense about terrorism. Remember, at the time, the president is saying Al-Qaeda's decimated. They're on the run. If anything, Steve, we've seen these affiliates and core Al-Qaeda, as the administration likes to say, increase their lethal ability.
I think that's one of the reasons that the Benghazi issue continues to resonate, why it continues to be a discussion. In addition to the fact that we've gotten answers that just don't add up from the White House for so long, you also have the reality on the ground. I mean, the administration went to great lengths to make the argument that al-Qaeda was on the run, that it had been decimated. It hadn't been decimated. It was clear, I think, to many people at the time that it hadn't been decimated, but it's certainly clear in retrospect that it hadn't been decimated, that al-Qaeda was not on the run. We've seen it grow. We've seen it strengthen both, as you say, in the core and in the affiliates, and it remains a huge threat to this very day.
Charles.
But of course it's a terrorist attack. Terrorism is not so much randomness in a military attack. It's a military attack whose purpose is political. It's a statement. It's a political effect. It is the sort of the words coming out of a gun. And here it had an entirely political effect, and it succeeded. It announced that al-Qaeda was alive and well. It hastened the withdrawal of America entirely from any interest in Libya. And so in its essence, it was a way of saying it wasn't that the killing of an ambassador changes the course of a war, but it makes a statement that changes the psychology of the enemy, i.e. us. Of course it was a terrorist attack, and it was obvious in the first half hour.
As with many stories, it often takes time and persistence before the truth is known. With regard to Benghazi, we will remain on the case, poised to bring you the very latest, including any developments on a House Select Committee as soon as they happen. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, and good night.